you go to Canvas, again, you'll see that data file, GSS 87, 88, 89, 93, kind of a long-winded name for a file, .sav. And so .sav is the extension for SPSS data files. So there's not just one type of SPSS file. There are actually 3 different types of SPSS files. And .sav is sort of like the core file. It's the data file. You can't really run anything else without those files. The others are syntax files, which you'll see in a moment. And then there are output files, which have the extension .spv. GSS 87, 88, 89, 93 is an extract from something known as the General Social Survey, which is conducted by the National Opinion Research Center. It's been conducted since 1972. It's usually around 1,000 to 1,500 respondents per year. And they don't ask exactly the same questions every wave. There are certain questions that are asked every wave. There are other questions that change because they're very kind of topical. So in an election year, they'll ask questions about the presidential candidate. So obviously from election to election, that's going to be different. But they'll tend to ask some basic questions like national spending priorities, certainly the demographic kind of information. There are certain attitudinal questions that are asked more than others. And in particular, for our purposes, there was 1 year in 1993 where, for whatever reason, they asked a bunch of questions about musical preferences. And I found those questions interesting. And so I like to use those as examples. And it's also, if you work in the music industry, that's marketing data, right? So this extract pulled from those 4 years specifically. From 87, 88, and 89, we've got some data on religion, religious attitudes, and religious behavior, and also some data on political orientation. The 1993 survey, we're pulling those music variables. And then there are demographic variables that were asked in every year. And so you'll have those for all 4 of the years that are in there. And we're just using this data to explore the basic stat testing functionality and the data transformation functionality of SPSS. Now, when you first open an SPSS data file, you will typically see what's known as the data view. And so I've got a screenshot here, but I'm going to shift over to the data file in just a minute. Now, each row represents a case, or in this case, we'd say that's a respondent, an individual, someone who responded to the survey. And each column represents a variable. And we talked about independent and dependent variables before. A spreadsheet kind of data file is often referred to as a table. So if you came from like a database management background, you talk about like this is a table. Usually in a database, you've got multiple tables. If you came from more of a programmer background, like now R and Python have become software packages or languages really of choice for doing a lot of data science and data analytics work. They don't focus just on sort of this rectangular version of data, not just rows and columns, but it's one type of a data form that are used in some of those other more advanced statistical packages, and they would refer to this as a data frame. But for our purposes, SPSS, like Excel, right? So this looks like an Excel sheet. It's a spreadsheet, right? So we're thinking of data in terms of rows and columns. Now, the other thing that you'll have in addition to, and so this makes SPSS stand apart from Excel, right? Because it's not just a spreadsheet. They also have what's known as a variable view. And the variable view is basically like metadata. It's data about the data that you're seeing in the data view. So we've got each variable has a name, but it also has a more descriptive, longer label. And for the most part, the GSS variables, they give them pretty descriptive names. So it's not that hard to figure out what it's about when you see the variable name, but they also give you these longer labels. And if you notice, SPSS on my computer as I'm doing it now might look a little bit different than what I have in the screenshots in the PowerPoint deck. I was using SPSS version 25 at the time when I made the PowerPoint deck. I'm now in SPSS version 27, or again, I should say more specifically, IBM SPSS Statistics. There are various different SPSS programs, or applications, I should say. And the statistics package is the main one for people like me, and now people like you who are doing this kind of data analysis. There's also something known as SPSS Modeler. That was an old software package previously known as Clementine that had been purchased by SPSS, and then later IBM purchased SPSS, and it owns that too. So that became IBM SPSS Modeler. If any of you have any experience with that program looks quite a bit different. That uses nodes, and it's more of a graphical oriented program. But this is the standard SPSS statistics. All right, so here again, here's your data view, and that's your spreadsheet. Now, you could go right in and I could change this data. I could type a 1. And a lot of spreadsheet-based analytical programs, including Excel for sure, allow you to do that. Just go in and type in new data. As a general rule, and especially as you progress in this discipline, that's not something you want to do a whole lot of. That's generally considered bad practice to be manually changing your data. If you need to make changes to your data, you usually want to have some sort of record of it. And so more often, if you need to make an actual change to the data, it's better to do it by creating some syntax. And you could do that using these menus up here. And that's part of what we'll get into today. But rather than just overwriting things manually, it's not something I would advise you to do. But SPSS does allow you to do it, and so I'll point that out. Now, again, in the variable view, we've got descriptions of those variables, right? So if I come back to data view, you'll see here's big band, right? We've got a bunch of values. And if I look at, well, what is big band? Big band is a numeric variable. We're asking them, do they like or dislike big band music? And it's got a series of codes. Now, if I come here to values, and if I click on this, you'll see there's this little ... If I click on that, it shows me it's a data dictionary. It explains to me what the values represent. This is a Likert type scale, right? It's not an agreement scale, but it's a 5-point scale where 1 equals like very much and 5 equals dislike very much. It's fully labeled. I actually, generally speaking, I don't like coding my data this way. I prefer to make the higher numbers the more positive attributes, right? So more is better. But this is the way that the General Social Survey coded it, so we'll work with it as it is. There are ways, certainly, where you could reverse those codes, and I'll show you some of that functionality. But for now, we'll work with it as it is. It's 1 through 5. You'll see there's a couple of other codes. 8 is don't know much about it. 9 is NA. 0 is NAP. I think NAP is not applicable. NA is no answer. I'm not sure. In either case, both of them are essentially missing. And so if I click out of this for a second, you'll see here in SPSS, they've got a code here under variable view where you can define certain codes as being missing. So these are discrete missing values, 0, 8, and 9. Any of those values, because we've told SPSS here in the variable view, we've defined it as such that we're going to treat those as missing. It's the same as if they were just blank. And so SPSS has a default way of treating missing values. It basically will, it'll run. If you're running any math on a column with missing values, it will delete those cases from your analysis. And in some of the other functions, like frequencies, it will just have a separate line item where it explains that you've got missing data. It will separate out the missing codes from the valid codes. Most of this other stuff you don't need to worry about too much. We've talked about nominal, ordinal, interval, and ratio level data. And SPSS does have a column in the variable view that will categorize the data that way, except they call it nominal, ordinal, and scale. So scale would be both interval and ratio. The fact that you name it ordinal or scale, well, ordinal and scale are both numeric in some sort of way anyway, right? But ordinal data, you're not supposed to do math with it. But since they are numeric variables, you actually can. Now, the nominal codes are also, for the most part, numeric. And it will allow you to do math on those numeric codes, even if they're supposed to be nominal. So this column doesn't really do much other than it's sort of there for informational purposes. If you come over here to type, though, there's numeric, and it's either numeric or string, or it could be date as well. There's a few others. But the big ones for us are numeric and string. If you define a variable as string, even if it's if the actual text is numbers, it won't allow you to do math with it anymore. So this is a little bit stronger of a definitional column than this, but this is the one that is expressed in terms of the categories that we have talked about previously in class. Now, whether you're in the data view or the variable view, you'll see across the top here, you've got menus, right? And if I go to data view, it's the same menus, right? And it's the same options. So any of the tasks that we want to do using the options in the menu, you can do it from either the data view or the variable view. It doesn't matter. I mostly like to kind of stay in the the data view, but that's just my personal preference. It's there's no reason why you have to do that. Sometimes you'll want to look at the data view, like if you create a new variable, it's good to kind of scroll over to the end and go, oh, okay, is the new variable that I created actually there, right? And you can actually see that in the variable view too. If you create a new variable, there'll be a new row here. And that's something that, again, we will look at in just a second. So those are the basics of SPSS. For the most part, for this first lesson, we're going to be spending our time, well, really there are 3 columns. There's data, transform, and analyze. Within the analyze menu, at least for this module, we'll be hanging out here under descriptive statistics. So it's a lot of analyze, descriptive statistics, and then we'll be looking at frequencies, and after that, crosstabs. And so you'll find most of what you need there. Transform is a menu that allows you to make changes to the data file. So you can create a new variable, or you can recode variables. And so we'll be looking at recode into different variables today as one of the options. And then under data, now this is a very useful menu as well. I guess all the menus are useful, but this is one of the ones that I think you'll find that you use frequently. And for a lot of other things, but for today, we're only really going to be looking at it under the select cases option. And so that'll be the first thing that I show you. After that, I'll stop this video and then we'll move on, just to give you a break. And then I'll start up, I'll pick up in the next video.